The cement mixture's gurgling sound was the first warning. Judith Hartley's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her smartphone, capturing the evidence as thick gray sludge poured directly into her family's century-old well. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cold, calculated rage that had been brewing for months. Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association had always been Karen Thompson's personal kingdom. At 58, with razor-sharp cheekbones and a perpetual scowl that could freeze summer temperatures, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron clipboard and an arsenal of bylaws that seemed to change faster than Florida weather. The well predated this subdivision by decades. It was a piece of local history carefully maintained by Judith's family since her great-grandfather first dug it in 1923. But Karen didn't care about history. She cared about uniformity, conformity, and absolute control. Section 7, subsection C clearly states that all water sources must be approved municipal infrastructure. Karen had declared at last month's HOA meeting, her reading glasses perched precariously on her nose. That well is a safety hazard and an aesthetic violation. Judith remembered watching the other homeowners, mostly retirees and middle management types, nodding sheepishly. Nobody stood up to Karen. Nobody dared. But this was different. This was destruction of property. This was personal. The cement continued to pour, a steady stream of gray death into the well that had sustained her family through droughts, hurricanes, and generations of changes. Judith's security cameras captured every gruesome moment. The digital timestamps would be crucial evidence. She recognized the construction crew, local guys who always did Karen's bidding. They looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact, clearly aware they were crossing a line. But money talked in Maple Grove, and Karen's checkbook spoke volumes. What Karen didn't know was that Judith wasn't just another passive homeowner. A corporate attorney specializing in environmental law, she had spent years building a reputation for taking down powerful entities who thought they could simply bulldoze individual rights. This wasn't just about a well. This was about principle. As the last of the cement settled with a dull, heavy sound, Judith pressed send on the email to her firm's lead litigation partner. Attachments included property survey maps dating back to 1910, geological reports, water rights documentation, and the damning video footage. "Let the games begin," she whispered, a slight smile cutting across her face. Karen would soon learn that not every homeowner in Maple Grove Estates was willing to be another checkbox on her perfectly organized spreadsheet of suburban compliance. Some were prepared to fight back with every legal weapon in their arsenal. The cement hardened. The well was sealed. But Judith's resolve was just beginning to take shape, sharp, unbreakable, and ready to deliver a lesson in consequences that Karen Thompson would never forget. The first legal volley arrived precisely 3 weeks after the cement incident, delivered by a process server who looked almost apologetic as he handed Karen Thompson the thick manila envelope. Her perfectly pressed lavender blouse suddenly felt suffocating in the community center's overcrowded meeting room. Judith Hartley's lawsuit was a meticulously crafted weapon. Property damage, environmental violation, historical preservation infringement, each count was backed by documentation that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Karen had always believed her position as HOA president made her untouchable. Today, she was learning a brutal lesson in judicial reality. "This is preposterous," Karen muttered, her fingers tracing the embossed letterhead of Hartley and Associates Environmental Law. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Mark Wilson, the retired accountant who'd been her longest ally, suddenly found his shoes extraordinarily interesting. What Karen didn't realize was that Judith had been collecting evidence for months. The well wasn't just a water source, it was a documented historical landmark. Geological surveys, water rights documentation, and family records created a fortress of legal protection that Karen's hastily assembled cement solution couldn't penetrate. Behind the scenes, Judith's law firm was building a case that would make municipal lawyers sit up and take notice. This wasn't just about one well. It was about protecting individual property rights against overzealous homeowners associations that had grown drunk on their own power. Karen's reputation began to crumble faster than the cement in her ill-conceived plan. Neighbors who had previously feared her began to whisper. Social media caught wind of the story. A David versus Goliath battle that captured the imagination of suburban warriors tired of petty bureaucratic overreach. The HOA board meeting became a turning point. What was typically a monotonous gathering of clipboard-wielding retirees transformed into a referendum on Karen's leadership. Judith sat in the back, a study in calculated calm. Her evidence binders were thick, her demeanor unbreakable. "Ms. Thompson," the board secretary stammered, "we've reviewed the documentation, and it appears there are some significant concerns about your recent actions." Karen's world was shrinking. Her carefully constructed facade of control began to crack. Years of intimidating neighbors, enforcing increasingly bizarre regulations, and treating the HOA like her personal fiefdom were about to come crashing down. What she didn't know was that Judith had already spoken with 3 other homeowners who had similar stories: wells filled, landscaping forcibly altered, personal property damaged under the guise of community standards. A class action lawsuit was taking shape, with Judith as the primary plaintiff. A cement in the well was more than just a physical act of destruction. It was the moment Karen had finally overstepped, and Judith Hartley was about to make her pay, not just financially, but in the court of public opinion. As the meeting droned on, Karen's hands began to shake. For the first time in decades, she was no longer in control. The digital notification pinged at 7:14 a.m., a legal summons that would change everything. Karen Thompson's carefully curated world began to unravel with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, each slice calculated and brutal. Her husband, Roger, had long been the silent witness to her HOA tyranny. 37 years of marriage had taught him to fade into the background, to become human wallpaper, while Karen conducted her neighborhood campaigns. But this time was different. The lawsuit threatened everything: their savings, their reputation, their entire lifestyle. "They're requesting all communication records," Karen muttered, scrolling through the legal document. Her fingers, usually steady while marking infractions on neighbors' lawn heights or paint colors, now trembled slightly. The irony wasn't lost on Roger. For years, Karen had been the neighborhood's self-appointed prosecutor, citing homeowners for the most microscopic violations. A trash can left out 5 minutes too long. A flower bed 2 inches beyond the approved border. Lawn ornaments that didn't meet her exacting standards. Now the tables had turned with a vengeance. Judith Hartley's legal team was thorough. They weren't just attacking the well incident, they were dismantling Karen's entire history of HOA leadership. Digital records, email trails, complaint logs. Everything was about to be examined under a microscopic legal lens. The first crack in Karen's armor came from an unexpected source. Melissa Rodriguez, a younger homeowner Karen had previously cited for having a basketball hoop that was 3 inches too tall, reached out to Judith's legal team. She wasn't just a witness, she was a treasure trove of documented harassment. "I kept every single citation," Melissa told Judith's lead investigator. "Every single letter, every single fine. She made my life hell for years." What Karen didn't realize was that her decades of micromanagement had created a network of quietly resentful neighbors. Each person she had bullied now saw an opportunity for redemption, for justice. The HOA's own records became her worst enemy. Meticulously documented complaints, overzealous fines, and increasingly bizarre regulations painted a picture of a woman who had transformed a neighborhood association into a personal fiefdom. Roger watched the transformation with a mixture of fascination and terror. His wife, who had always been a force of nature, was suddenly vulnerable. The woman who could silence an entire room with a single glare was now reduced to frantically searching through decades of files trying to construct a defense. Private messages began to surface, screenshots of text conversations, emails that revealed a pattern of systematic harassment that went far beyond normal HOA management. Each document was another nail in Karen's carefully constructed coffin. The neighborhood watched. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became statements. And at the center of it all was Judith Hartley, calm, calculated, and absolutely determined to expose the truth. Karen's phone rang. It was her lawyer. The tone was not encouraging. The cement in the well was no longer just an isolated incident. It was becoming the symbol of everything that was wrong with unchecked community power. The deposition room felt like an interrogation chamber. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Karen Thompson's carefully maintained exterior, revealing every crack in her meticulously constructed facade. Judith Hartley sat across the table, a manila folder open before her, each document a weapon more precise than the last. Her legal team had transformed what could have been a simple property dispute into a comprehensive expose of systemic neighborhood harassment. "Ms. Thompson, can you explain why you sent a certified letter to Mr. Jenkins threatening legal action for a bird feeder that was allegedly 3 inches outside the approved zone?" Judith's voice was calm, clinical, each word carefully chosen. Karen's response came too quickly, too defensively. "Community standards must be maintained," she muttered, but the confidence that had once defined her was wavering. The digital evidence was damning. Years of emails, text messages, and official communications painted a portrait of a woman who had weaponized bureaucracy into a personal vendetta machine. What began as a dispute over a well had transformed into a comprehensive investigation of Karen's decade-long reign of neighborhood terror. Roger sat in the back of the room, a ghost of his former self. His wife, once a force of nature that could silence an entire HOA meeting with a single glance, now looked smaller, diminished. The power she had wielded so carefully was crumbling like the cement she had poured into Judith's well. "Let's discuss the Rodriguez incident," Judith continued, sliding a thick stack of documents across the table. Melissa Rodriguez, the homeowner Karen had previously harassed about a basketball hoop, had become a key witness. Her meticulously documented record of Karen's harassment was a legal goldmine. The room felt heavy with unspoken histories. Each page revealed another layer of Karen's systematic approach to neighborhood control. Fines for grass slightly over regulation height. Warnings about holiday decorations. Threats of legal action for the most microscopic violations. What Karen hadn't anticipated was the collective memory of the neighborhood. Each citation, each threatening letter, each moment of petty enforcement had been quietly documented. Neighbors who had once feared her were now eager to tell their stories. "I have witnesses," Judith stated, her voice cutting through Karen's mounting anxiety. 17 separate homeowners prepared to testify about consistent patterns of harassment and abuse of HOA power. The legal strategy was brilliant. This was no longer about a single well or a single act of vandalism. This was about systemic abuse of power, about the erosion of individual rights within a supposedly democratic community structure. Karen's lawyers shifted uncomfortably, the defense they had planned. A simple argument about community standards was crumbling faster than the cement in the well. "Ms. Thompson," Judith continued, "your actions have transformed a neighborhood association into a personal fiefdom. And today, you'll answer for that." Outside the deposition room, the world continued. Sprinklers ran. Lawns were mowed. But inside, the carefully constructed world of Karen Thompson was coming apart at the seams, one document at a time. The county courthouse steps became a battleground of suburban warfare. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical sentinels waiting for the next development in what had become the most talked-about legal drama in Maple Grove's history. Judith Hartley arrived precisely at 8:37 a.m., her tailored navy suit a statement of calculated professionalism. Behind her, a parade of witnesses filed in, homeowners who had suffered under Karen Thompson's tyrannical HOA reign, each carrying folders, each with a story of bureaucratic overreach. What had begun as a simple dispute over a well had metamorphosed into a landmark case about community power, individual rights, and the dangerous potential of unchecked local authority. The preliminary hearing revealed layers of complexity that no one had anticipated. Digital forensics had uncovered a network of communication that suggested Karen hadn't just been enforcing rules. She'd been systematically targeting specific homeowners. Emails showed calculated patterns of harassment, financial manipulation, and what could only be described as petty vendettas disguised as community management. Mark Wilson, the retired accountant who had been Karen's longest board ally, had become her most devastating witness. Years of quiet observation had equipped him with a detailed understanding of her methods. His testimony would prove to be the death knell of Karen's defense. "She didn't just enforce rules," Mark testified, his voice trembling slightly. "She weaponized them. The HOA became her personal instrument of control." Roger Thompson sat in the back of the courtroom, a man transformed by the unraveling of his wife's carefully constructed world. 37 years of marriage had been built on a foundation of her absolute control, and now that foundation was crumbling in real time. The well wasn't just a physical structure. It had become a symbol, a line in the sand between community oversight and personal freedom. Geological experts testified about its historical significance. Environmental lawyers discussed the ecological impact of Karen's cement solution. Each expert witness drove another nail into the coffin of her defense. Judith's strategy was surgical. She wasn't just seeking damages for the destroyed well. She was exposing a systemic problem of power abuse within small community organizations. Each piece of evidence was carefully selected, each witness meticulously prepared. "This isn't about one well," Judith would later tell the press. "This is about protecting individual rights against bureaucratic tyranny." The neighborhood watched. Social media buzzed. What had once been whispered conversations in driveways and over backyard fences was now a public spectacle of legal reckoning. Karen Thompson, once the most feared person in Maple Grove Estates, now sat small and diminished. Her power was dissolving faster than the cement she had so callously poured into Judith's historical well. The very tools she had used to control others were now being used to dismantle her entire legacy. The courthouse steps would become hallowed ground, a place where a single act of bureaucratic aggression would be transformed into a watershed moment of community justice. The mediation room felt like a powder keg of suppressed suburban tensions. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on the faces of people who had spent years living next to each other, but never truly seeing one another. Karen's lawyer looked defeated. The mountain of evidence had transformed what should have been a simple property dispute into a comprehensive takedown of her entire approach to neighborhood management. Judith Hartley sat across the table, a living embodiment of calculated patience. "We're prepared to go to full trial," Judith stated, her voice calm but laden with implications. "But there's an opportunity for resolution." The digital trail had been devastating. Years of Karen's emails, text messages, and official communications formed a damning narrative of systematic harassment. What had started with a cement-filled well had become an explosive bureaucratic overreach that would reshape how HOAs operated. Melissa Rodriguez, the homeowner previously cited for a basketball hoop violation, sat among the witnesses. Her presence alone was a testament to the broader impact of Karen's reign. Each person in the room carried a story of petty enforcement, of dreams crushed by clipboards and arbitrary rules. Roger Thompson watched his wife, the woman who had controlled every aspect of their lives, who had made neighbors tremble with a single glance, now reduced to a shell of her former self. 37 years of marriage had been built on her ability to control everything around her. Now that control was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The mediator, a retired judge with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every possible human conflict, reviewed the documentation. Mark Wilson's detailed financial records revealed a pattern of financial manipulation within the HOA that went far beyond simple rule enforcement. Ms. Thompson, the mediator, began, the evidence suggests a systemic approach to community management that goes well beyond reasonable oversight. Karen's defense had crumbled. The cement in the well was no longer just a singular act of vandalism. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked local authority. Each piece of evidence was another blow to her carefully constructed facade of community leadership. Judith's strategy was multi-layered. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. This was about creating a precedent that would protect homeowners from similar abuses of power. The well was historical. The community's rights were paramount. "We're prepared to discuss a settlement," Judith continued, sliding a folder across the table. The numbers inside would make most people breathless, but for Judith, it was about more than money. It was about justice. The room held its breath. Years of suppressed neighborhood tensions hung in the air like a thick fog. Karen Thompson, who had once ruled Maple Grove Estates with an iron fist, now looked small, diminished. Outside, the world continued. Sprinklers ran. Lawns were mowed. But inside this room, a different kind of landscape was being reshaped, one document, one revelation at a time. The final judgment came on a Tuesday morning with autumn light filtering through the courthouse windows like a spotlight of judicial reckoning. Judith Hartley stood composed, her victory measured and precise, while Karen Thompson seemed to physically shrink with each word of the ruling. $50,000. Historical preservation damages, punitive compensation, community impact restoration. The numbers were more than monetary. They were a complete vindication of everything Judith had fought to prove. The well wasn't just a water source. It was a testament to individual rights, to community history, to the power of standing up against bureaucratic tyranny. Mark Wilson's testimony had been the turning point. Years of quiet observation had equipped him with a detailed understanding of Karen's systematic approach to neighborhood control. His documentation revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that went far beyond simple HOA management. It was never about the rules, Mark had testified during the final hearing. It was about control, pure and simple. Roger Thompson watched from the back of the courtroom, a man transformed by the unraveling of his wife's carefully constructed world. 37 years of marriage had been built on a foundation of her absolute control, and now the foundation had completely crumbled. The judgment was comprehensive. Not only would Karen be forced to pay significant damages, but her ability to serve on any HOA board was permanently revoked. The court's ruling was a line in the sand, a clear message about the limits of local authority. Melissa Rodriguez, the homeowner previously harassed about a basketball hoop, sat among the witnesses. Her presence was a powerful reminder of the broader impact of Karen's reign. Each citation, each threatening letter, each moment of petty enforcement had been quietly documented and was now part of the public record. Social media exploded. Local news stations ran extended segments. What had begun as a dispute over a well had transformed into a landmark case about community power, individual rights, and the dangerous potential of unchecked local authority. "This isn't just about one well," Judith told reporters outside the courthouse. "This is about protecting individual rights against bureaucratic overreach." The cement Karen had poured, her ultimate act of neighborhood control, had become the very thing that would destroy her reputation forever. Each cubic inch of that cement was now a permanent record of her downfall, a physical manifestation of her inability to understand the true meaning of community. Maple Grove Estates would never be the same. The HOA would be restructured. New bylaws would be implemented. And at the center of it all was Judith Hartley, a woman who had transformed a personal injustice into a community triumph. As the courthouse cleared, the autumn wind seemed to whisper a message of change. Justice, slow and methodical, had finally found its moment.